Taste and trends change. You need a new floor, and you're reluctant to break out the existing floor. Then you can now install a new floor on top. We'll show you in this episode how to do so. Before you buy your floor, you naturally have to know if your existing subfloor is in good condition. Your floor isn't even, for example. Then you will need to level it first. This subfloor has been leveled. It should be perfectly even, but it's always a good idea to check. For the floor I want to install here, I may have a maximum difference of half a centimeter over a distance of 3 meters. My flat bar is 3 meters long, thus I shouldn't have an opening bigger than half a centimeter. Once you've made sure the floor is sufficiently even, you can start measuring the room to determine how many square meters you need. You can draw the room on a piece of paper. Take into account all corners and edges of the room. Also calculate more than 10% for the cut loss. It's best to acclimatize the floor. The day before, put the tiles in the room where you'll be working. Doing so, you are certain it won't expand too much after installation. In order to determine where to install the tiles and to distribute evenly, you could draw a reference line. This enables us to determine the installation of the tiles. We can immediately continue to this step as we don't have to install a subfloor as it is already incorporated in the tile, which also has an acoustic advantage. Choosing the installation direction proves to be a difficult choice at times. You can use the installation direction of the room, which will make it look longer, or you can choose to install in width, which will make the room look wider. You can also consider a fixed element, for example a kitchen island, so you can install the planks in the same direction as the fixed element. Once you've chosen the direction, you measure the length and the width, divided by the width or the length of the planks, to check if you won't end with a small piece, so you won't end up with remainder pieces. Measure a full plank first. Then indicate the middle of a tile and put it on your reference line. Afterwards, measure the distance between the tile and the wall. Now calculate if you have remainder pieces by dividing the number by the length of the tile. If you have a number after the decimal point, you'll have a remainder piece. In our case, the remainder piece is 6% of the length of a tile, which is too little. Repeat the process and measure everywhere you have projections or obstacles, and don't forget to check in width. I've noticed the remainder pieces on that side are too small, so I'll draw a new reference line using a red marker to make it clear. That reference line is the line I will be following for the installation of my floor. We draw a reference line as it is easier to work in a straight line. Certainly, in the case of a stretcher bond, you will be able to ensure a beautiful and straight end result. Before we start installing, the room has to be cleaned. Remove dirt with a vacuum cleaner to avoid it getting under the floor. In order to prevent ending up with a small row at the end, we have to shorten the width of the first row. We start cutting some tiles to size. Mark the correct measurement on your tile. Using a flat bar and a sharp box cutter, you can cut the tile, then break it in half. Use this first piece as a model and delineate it on a second tile. Cut again. Use your knee to break the tile. The length of the first tile in the row has to be cut to size as well. The process is the same. Now the planks have been cut to size, we can install the first row. That row should be installed together with the second row. The stretcher bond has to be installed correctly from the beginning. In order to do so, indicate the middle of the tile on one row and level it exactly with the following row. If needed, measure from the middle the length of the first tile in the second row. Cut the tile you start with to size. Click the two rows together. Use a tapping block and a rubber mallet to close the seams. Repeat the procedure with every seam to make sure they are well connected. Now continue installing the two rows until you've almost reached the end. In order to make sure you're installing in a straight line, you have to install the first two rows simultaneously. When they're connected, which makes it firmer, slide them into place. But take into account an expansion joint of 8 mm. When they're in place, you can measure the last piece. Here, you'll have to consider an expansion joint as well. Measure from the tile to the wall to determine the length of the last tile. Take into account the expansion joint of 8 mm. Transfer the measurement to your tile and use a flat bar again to cut the tile to size. Cut several times to ensure a good fracture line. Finish the two rows. Make sure the seams connect well everywhere, and if needed, tap the seam. With the first rows in place, you will be able to continue faster. Take into account the stretcher bond. The top end seam of the tile should not be level with the previous row, but with the row before the previous row. Use the reference line to check. The planks click together easily. Always start with the long side and then click the short side. Tap the seam on both sides using a hammer and tapping block until they are flat and you're sure the seams connect. Then tap the long side. Always use a tapping block to avoid damage to the click system. If needed, it's easy to make cutouts with your box cutter and a flat bar. Cut several times along the drawn-on line and break the piece by hand or by using pliers. Don't forget your expansion joint, so the floor won't be jammed between the walls when they expand and they won't bulge. Installing a stretcher bond demands extra time, but still the installation is fast, as the vinyl tiles already come with a subfloor attached. but also as you can cut the tiles on the spot with a box cutter. You don't have to run back and forth to the sawing machine. You can do it on the spot. Cut the upper side and break in half. When you reach the door, you have to use a profile. The door frame has to be customized. Put a tile on the floor and use it as a guide to customize the frame with a multi-tool. You can use a screwdriver to remove the piece of wood. Use your tile to check if everything connects well. You won't be able to use the tapping block everywhere. If needed, use the mounting iron to tap the seam. Before I install a vinyl tile, I always check for damages, particularly in the corner. What's the best way to install them? First, slide in the long side in a small angle. Tighten, and then tap the short side with a rubber mallet and a tapping block. Start from the corner to the long side. And if you see the long side doesn't connect well, use the same block to tap gently on the long side. Along the long side, you have to tap the upper side of the seam to make sure they connect sufficiently. The room has been finished, and it's time to install the skirting boards. We cut the skirting boards in mitre in order to ensure a good connection in the corners. First, check if everything connects well. Then apply enough structural adhesive to the skirting boards and place them against the wall. Install the second side in the same way. The following skirting boards have also been sawed in mitre to make the seam as invisible as possible. You can finish the skirting boards that don't connect perfectly with an acrylic sealant. You see, installing a new floor doesn't automatically mean you have to start cutting and breaking. When you install a new floor on the old one, you immediately give a new look to the room.